Good evening. I'm Mac Barrett, Curator of Public Programming at Roosevelt House, on behalf of Hunter College President Jennifer Rabb and Roosevelt House Director Harold Holzer. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual discussion of Hunter College High School and Hunter College alumna, the trailblazing pioneering scientist Mildred Dresselhaus. In Carbon Queen, the remarkable life of nanoscience pioneer Mildred Dresselhaus, Maya Weinstock chronicles Millie's extraordinary life, beginning with growing up in the Bronx in the 1940s, when girls were told they should not aspire to careers beyond that of teacher, nurse, or secretary. Maya brings to life Millie's defiance of those expectations and shows how she instead reached the peak of scientific achievement, eventually earning the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor from President Barack Obama. Among the most transformative periods of Millie's life was her time at Hunter College, where she came under the wing of Nobel Prize winner Rosalind Yalow. About that time, Millie said, in reference to Yalow, as quoted in Hunter 150, Celebrating the Past, Caring for the Future, Rosalind Yalow encouraged me to pursue science as much as I could, saying that she thought I had enough talent to make a career of it. In those days, nobody had great expectations for careers. There weren't really many jobs in the sciences at the time, but I loved it so much, and she was doing it, so I figured I could do about the same. And so she did, going on to make influential discoveries about the properties of carbon that have had a lasting impact in fields ranging from electronics and cell phones to aviation, medicine, and energy. So great were her contributions, in fact, that General Electric made her the star of a nationally broadcast TV spot to encourage young women to go into the sciences, and in it, the question was asked, what if we treated great female scientists like they were stars? With images of Millie mobbed by adoring fans and trailed by paparazzi. We are grateful to Maya for capturing so well the story of Millie's extraordinary life and impact, so that generations to come may learn what a rock star she really was. Maya is an editor, writer, and producer of science and children's media whose work has appeared in Scientific American, Discover, Space.com, BrainPop, and Scholastic's Science World. She is Deputy Editorial Director at MIT News, a lecturer at MIT on the history of women in STEM, and creator of Lego's Women of NASA. To speak with Maya, I'm pleased to welcome Hunter College Professor of Physics and Astronomy, Kel Cruz. Kel is a research associate at the American Museum of Natural History, a visiting scientist at the Flatiron Institute, and a passionate advocate of inclusive practices in STEM. Before we begin, please remember to enter your questions and comments into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any time during the program, and we will address as many as time allows. Also, please look for a link to purchase Carbon Queen in the chat. Maya, Kel, thank you for being here to speak with us about the amazing Mildred Dresselhaus. With that, please welcome Maya Weinstock and Kel Cruz.
Hi, everybody. It's so great. I can't see your faces, but I recognize so many names in the audience. It's great to have all of you here to discuss and really celebrate the achievements of Millie Dresselhaus. I'm sorry, I can't call her Mildred. Everybody I know has always called her Millie, so I will also refer to her as Millie. And thank you so much, Maya, for taking the time and effort to write this, very thorough and delightful read. Why don't we just get started by, building a little bit on the introduction which Mac just gave us and tell us how you got interested in Millie's life and in writing the book.
Sure. And thank you so much, Kelly, for being here. Thank you, Mac, for the introduction. I'm actually very excited to be talking to you guys today about Millie. I know she talked many times about Hunter College and her connection with both Hunter College High School and later Hunter College. So we'll get a little bit more into that and her experiences here. But just to answer your question, in terms of how I got into this book, I work at MIT, but the first time I actually heard about Millie, I was a young science reporter at Discover magazine. And in 2002, it was almost exactly 20 years ago. It was the summer, 20 years ago. I was assigned to fact check an article about 50 top women in science at the time that the editors had sort of chosen to highlight. And Millie was one of them, not surprisingly now, but I didn't know anything about her at the time. So, I her name was one of the 50, and I kind of still actually remember every single person who was on that list. And when I joined MIT, the staff in the news office there, as an editor, I came across her more often just because, we would report on not only her research, which she was continuing well into her 80s, but she was, consistently getting recognized for awards and also participating in, women in STEM support programs, that, her name would be listed as someone who was participating. And so I had heard about her. I had heard sort of legends of Millie, and so I became a fan kind of at that time, really, and wanted to know a little bit how, what made her tick and how she continued this work well into a time when, most people, when they become emerita, they just retire and, they might have some activities, but are not like in the office still at 7 a.m. every single day. And she did that still. So, but I will say I did not plan to write about her life. Unfortunately, when she died in 2017, in February of that year at the age of 86. And shortly after that happened, I was approached by some colleagues at the MIT Press, which is independent from my office. So I had no idea they were cooking up the idea to kind of do some books about women in STEM fields. And they asked me if I would have interest in writing a book on one of a few scientists they were considering profiling, and Millie was one of the names. And, I had remembered just a few months earlier, there was the ad that Mac talked about, the GE spot, that really summarized her life so well. And I was really inspired. That wasn't the reason, that wasn't the impetus, but she sort of had this final sort of moment of fame right before her. It was actually right at the same time of her passing. And so I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to kind of let people know a little bit more about what made her tick. And frankly, I didn't know, and I was very curious. So I couldn't pass that up. I think we actually have that clip. So if we want to play it, maybe we can take a look and people can get a sense of, that inspiration from her.
Happy birthday, sweetie.
Whoa, Millie Dresselhaus से. We are so glad to have you here. Shukriya.
So Millie Dresselhaus was seen having lunch today.
I wish we lived in a world like this. A world where great female scientists were treated like stars.
Une photo avec vous?
Yes, queen.
Like Millie Dresselhaus, the first woman to ever win the National Medal of Science and Engineering. If it were up to me, everyone would know her name. I hope that one day we live in a world where women like Millie are as famous as any celebrity. I think that day is coming soon.
Yeah, I gotta say, even watching that today, it makes me tear up a little bit.
That's so inspirational.
Yeah. So it's hard not to get inspired by her, but also just learning more about her background and just how far she came to get to where she did, I think was really something I wanted to tell in a way that hadn't been done before.
Yeah, and so it's so awesome also that she has so many connections to Hunter and New York City. And so clearly lots of us here also have those connections. And so could you talk about the role of Hunter College High School and Hunter College and how and the formation of her amazingness?
Absolutely. Yeah. So both her high school time and her college time in the city were extremely formational, just in terms of her personality and also her direction in life. So just to give a little background for those who might not know, Millie was born in 1930 in Brooklyn, actually. Her parents were immigrants who had escaped. They had kind of come to the United States before things got really bad during the Holocaust. And unfortunately, almost all of Millie's family that stayed behind in Eastern Europe died, were killed. as part of the Holocaust. And so, her parents had very little, and they originally settled in Brooklyn, right at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, where they ran a little newsstand, candy shop, whatnot. But they ended up moving their family to the Bronx to take an opportunity to have her brother take music lessons up there. And so that's how they ended up there. And unfortunately, at the time, the neighborhood that she lived in was pretty rough. There was a lot of gang activity. There was a lot of just like petty crime. And it was just kind of a bit of an unstable area. And unfortunately, her schools at the time were under-resourced, and a lot of the kids didn't really focus on schoolwork, and they just kind of acted out. So fortunately, though, Millie ended up going along with her brother to music lessons at what ended up being in Greenwich Village, back down in Manhattan, another music school that ended up taking both of them on. And through that, she learned that, there were these magnet schools that you could test into, and only one of them, Hunter College High School, would accept girls at that time. So she figured out that she could test into it and that she could learn how to take the test. She had no idea. Her teachers said, "You have no chance to get in." They didn't even bother encouraging her. They just were like, "You're not going to get in." And so she figured that she really needed a way out of her poor life. And I say poor in the sense of like monetary poorness. Her family was very richly, they had just so much love of music. They were very culturally rich, but they had a hard time making ends meet. Her father actually had a very difficult time adjusting to the fact that his family basically completely all died. So he was often hospitalized. And so her mother was the breadwinner of the family. And she just, it was Millie actually as a child was a child laborer sometimes, just to make ends meet. And so that was just a difficult existence. And when she learned that there were magnet schools like Hunter, that she could kind of pursue her natural curiosity for intellectual things, whether it was culture or, math. She was really interested in numbers. Then she basically checked out books out of the library, and she actually aced her exam to get into Hunter. So at Hunter College High School, she sort of transformed a little from, a girl who really was like very street smart, but didn't really know, she wasn't book smart at that point. And so she got interested in math and science. She took like every possible elective and class that she could. She was just always super curious. And that really, that she was like one of the top students in her class. She was renowned for being a math whiz. She used to start tutoring her peers. And she actually ended up making a fair amount of money that way and became financially independent by the time she was ready to graduate high school. And she actually ended up doing so well on her Regents exams, her sort of state exams, that she was offered a scholarship to go to Cornell University. But she didn't think that she would even have an opportunity to go because she thought her family couldn't afford the balance of tuition. So she didn't even apply there. And she ended up, she knew that she had an opportunity to go to Hunter College, because I don't know if this is still the case, but at the time anyway, if you get into Hunter College High School, you are automatically offered admission to Hunter College. And so she was excited to go to Hunter. So that's how that transition happened. And then once she did get to Hunter, she had very advanced standing in her math and science, I think, just because she had done so well at the high school level. But she, in her sophomore year, she met Rosalind Yalow, who some of you may recognize as a later Nobel laureate in medicine, who at the time when Millie met her was a adjunct professor at Hunter College teaching physics. And Millie said that it was kind of a love at first sight. Yeah, you might want to, we have some pictures. So that's Rosalind. I don't know the exact year on this, but she was pretty young then. And I want to say it was right around the time that she would have been teaching. Millie in her intro physics. I think it was a nuclear physics class, excuse me. And, you know, she kind of saw in Millie someone who was very similar to herself, very curious, very driven, and also trying to figure out how to make a life in science while also being a woman and being Jewish. Because at the time it was really difficult, even for Rosalind Yalow, to find a career in science at that time. And that's actually why she had gone back to Hunter. You know, Rosalind Yalow herself was an alumna. She was about 10 years older. But after she got her PhD in physics, she was not able to get a research job. And so she was trying to figure out a way to get a research job when she met Millie, and she really encouraged her to say, you can do this. You are really smart. You have the curiosity and the drive. Like I can see that in you. And she gave her so many opportunities to, you know, she recommended that Millie would go study or just go see colloquia at Columbia, which was, you know, the physics department, as you probably, any historian of science will probably know, there's a few, you know, really powerhouse departments at that time. And Columbia was one of them. And so, you know, Millie would have never known that otherwise. So the fact that Rosalind like suggested you should go to these colloquia and meet people and talk to people, you know, that was just one example, but she really sort of took her under her wing and encouraged her and gave her really good recommendations and all of this. So, you know, Hunter, another dimension that I should say just generally that Millie always brought up about Hunter College is that, you know, Millie did not have to pay a lot in tuition at that time. And she always said that she learned that when she went to Hunter, she felt that she was told that, you know, this free education isn't free. We expect you to go out and do amazing things in the world and pay it back to other people by lifting other people up and giving opportunities to other people. And Millie really kept that with her. And so beyond just science, just the opportunity to kind of pay things forward, you know, and help the next generation and help other people, I think is another critical way that Hunter really helped shape, you know, Millie and was you know, something that she always talked about. I think, you know, she really had a wonderful time there. So that's kind of like,
it's also it's also so nice to hear that, you know, some of those Hunter College stays true to so much of that, where, you know, the tuition is not free anymore, but it's much more affordable than other campuses. And one of the things as a Hunter professor, which I really appreciate, is how easy access it is to all these other amazing campuses and other science centers. And so, you know, I think New York City and Hunter in particular remains a place to really launch young female scientists, and from many different backgrounds, because we have New York City to recruit from.
That's
So
right.
it's a testament to the longevity of Hunter. Just curious, I was thinking about this. Do you know which campus she spent time at? Was it the Bronx? Because at that time, I think there was still the Bronx campus and the East Side.
Yeah, I want to
campus.
say that it was in Manhattan already.
Okay.
She did have to get on the subway to go there, and actually she ended up sharing a commute with her mom. She commuted still. You know, I mentioned in the book that it wasn't like she was in a dorm. So I seem to recall that she did have to commute out. And so I think it must have been already, but I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure it was already on the East Side.
Yeah, I'm really curious about all the physical locations that Hunter College has changed, but we can save that for another book. Maybe that can be the next book.
Okay.
So, you know, we've already touched on it, and it, you know, sort of the elephant in the room, that Millie faced so much discrimination, and women and people from different backgrounds faced a lot of discrimination, really everywhere they went. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about her approach to dealing with that discrimination, her path to, I think she had some growth in understanding things in the future, and what junior scientists can potentially learn from that path.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, Millie did have a little bit of growing to do in this area, because she started off going to girls' schools with, you know, women as educators, and she said in a couple of interviews that she didn't really get a sense in her early education that girls couldn't do anything. I mean, couldn't, you know, do anything that they set their mind to. But, you know, eventually she kind of made her way out into the world and saw that I think her real first experience with this was when she was in grad school at Harvard. She was technically at Radcliffe, but she took classes at Harvard. And, you know, she was pretty much the only woman there, at least in her physics classes. There was one class where the professor would call on her every day, and this is, you know, grad school now, and he would ask her to sort of review the previous day's class, or the previous week's class, or whatever it was. But he would ask her every single class as though she were a secretary, and no, you know, nobody else would get called on this way, and it was made her really uncomfortable. Later, when she was at the University of Chicago for her PhD program, it was even worse in the sense that her PhD advisor, who was, I think, just assigned to her based on the subject matter that she was going to focus on, which was solid state physics, you know, he really had no interest in having anything to do with her, because he felt strongly that women had no place in science. And he told her so many times to her face, or maybe not too many, because at a certain point he just would not see her. You know, she mentioned that there were like nude pinup posters, you know, in the labs or where the other students were, you know, studying. And, you know, these were obviously frustrations, but her attitude throughout, both with, you know, the question of whether she was belonging because she was a woman, or just other obstacles she faced. She was someone who had a fairly well developed sense of, I'm going to work around you no matter what. Like, you know, I feel like I can do this. And she, you know, benefited from a sense of, you know, feeling like she could just, you know, figure out some other way to do things. But I will also say that she was hugely supported by other people who encouraged her. So whether that was someone like Rosalind Yallow at Hunter, whether that was someone like her future husband, Jean Dresselhaus. She also actually was married briefly before to another physicist who I don't know much about that story, but I imagine that he probably encouraged her as well. If you compare their actual trajectories, they are actually very similar in terms of where they were. So I'm sure that he provided some encouragement. There were professors. This is a photo of Jean Dresselhaus shortly after I think that was on their honeymoon. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was on their honeymoon. And here's another one in California. And so Jean really was a huge supporter of hers. Jean actually was a postdoc at the University of Chicago when she was a grad student. And when Millie finished her grad program at Chicago, and Jean actually had an opportunity to be a professor at Cornell, Millie decided to take a postdoc there so that they could be together. And when that finished, you know, she had issues with people not wanting to support her because she was a woman then as well. But the big issue here is that when she was finished with her postdoc, Cornell refused to hire her in any kind of way. They just didn't want to have anything to do with her because she was a woman. And, you know, Jean, to his great credit, decided to leave his plum, you know, position as an assistant professor. And he was brilliant as well. I mean, he's sort of like the unsung hero of this book because people don't really know that he was commonly a collaborator with Millie in her papers. He was, you know, a brilliant theoretical physicist in the same area. And so he really supported her as well. But just generally in her life, Millie had the feeling of, I'm going to try to figure out a way to work around you. And later she felt that she learned a little bit more about just how women were being treated in science. And she realized that she needed to kind of step it up a little bit and use the power that she was given by eventually being, you know, a professor at MIT, which comes with, you know, some like some kudos. And she, really started paying it back by connecting with students and asking what their concerns were, connecting with faculty members, wives of other professors, and, trying to see if there were ways that she could help make things better and more accepting for women at MIT, and then later at other places around universities and other research centers around the country, and indeed around the world. So it was kind of a lifelong project for her, and something that she felt really passionate about. And it wasn't just encouraging women in STEM, but encouraging anyone who is underrepresented in STEM. She actually also very often felt responsible for taking students who were struggling and helping them specifically. And so that was something that was inspiring to me, because there are plenty of professors who, they have the sink or swim mentality, and Millie was the complete opposite of that. She expected you to work hard. Absolutely. She was known as someone who, you needed to do your work. But if she saw that you were serious and that you were able to do your work and that you were still struggling, she would help you along. And I gave a couple of examples of that in the book.
I really resonated with that one story of her creating the extra section of a class to basically review all the material that one student was missing. And that's one of those things where it's like, oh, like I've designed other sections of classes, to be at the same time period, but I never thought about adding a specific study section. So that's definitely something which I could see myself implementing. So you talked about Jean a little bit already, but I also have to admit that I had a lot of imposter syndrome flashing at me while I was reading this book. She did a lot, so I've heard this before, that in order to be a successful professional woman, you definitely need to have a supportive spouse. But she had other people to help her as well. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about all the other supporters that she had. And also, I think it's, think about the junior scientists potentially in our audience, like inspire them, like it's like, what else can we delegate? What all did Millie delegate?
Absolutely. So I guess the first one that I should mention is that, so Millie had 4 children in very quick succession shortly after she started. Her first child was born at Cornell when she was still a postdoc. And for a number of reasons, that's her at Cornell. And then that's also her at Cornell. She had that's her daughter, Marianne, who I believe was born in 1958 or 59, I forget. But, there was no maternity leave or parental leave of any kind at that time. And so, she brought her suitcase to the hospital, and she brought her children to the lab. And she had, once they moved to Massachusetts, where she and Jean ended up having their first job together at Lincoln Lab, which is a federally funded research center that MIT is the administrator for. She hired a woman named Dorothy Terzian, who was her nanny. And that name doesn't even cover everything. She, was the family chef. She was the babysitter. She did all sorts of home caretaking. Now, I will say that her husband, Jean, actually was very well known in her family and otherwise for, and unusual for his time, for being a husband who actually participated very equally in household chores and kid raising. But, he had a full-time job as well. And so during the day, for, their 4 children, Mrs. Terzian took care of them and really became sort of part of the family. She had her own children, and they were kind of out of the house. And so to make money, she, became a nanny. And Millie had said that she ended up in the beginning years paying her more than Millie was actually making in salary. But she felt that this was an investment, that she had to make in her career. So I think a lot of us, who have kids, little kids, who are paying for childcare can totally understand this. It sometimes seems completely out of reach to be able to pay for childcare. But even Millie at that time, she never really talked about it that much. when she was doing her interviews, but this is something that I definitely wanted to ask about myself, because that was one of those, how did she possibly do it? Well, it certainly wasn't alone. She had a huge help from her husband and from Mrs. Terzian. And then later, when she was, there's plenty of people in her life who just like supported her, people in her office, but I will also just give a special mention to, her, one of her her longest serving assistant, Laura Doty at MIT, is someone who I got to know pretty well just in interviewing her. And, you could tell that she was sort of someone who, at least in her work at MIT, but just in all of her work, that was so international and just so, it was like nonstop. There was always something going on. Laura was sort of the behind the scenes person. And later she had another assistant toward the end of her career, Reed Shusky, who was helpful as well, but he was, did not work as long for her. And Laura really kind of helped set up everything. And I think she worked with her for like about 20 or 30 years. I forget the exact number. So definitely there were people behind the scenes who, made things smooth for Millie's life. At the same time, Millie did have this extremely unusual drive. She is definitely not someone that you can look up to and say, I need to do everything that she's done, because it's kind of impossible. She ended up co-authoring 1,700 papers, which is super unusual, even for highly accomplished scientists and engineers. 1,700 is a lot. So, part of my reason for wanting to kind of, go into these things in the book is to be inspired by just how much she did, but also to get a sense that, like, yeah, she did have these people helping her along the way.
Yeah, I'm aspiring for the time when I get an assistant paid for by the college, right? So some people here can put in a good word for me. Kelly needs an assistant.
I will definitely put in a good word for you.
Thank you. No one has an assistant, but that's fine. So I was really impressed with how much science you managed to get into the book. There was a lot of physics, and I'm an astronomer, not a condensed matter physicist, and so I learned a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about her scientific achievements and also the process that she went through to get the science weaved through the book?
Sure, absolutely. And let me tell you, my background as a science writer is actually also in astronomy and space sciences. So I had very little knowledge of the material science that I ended up learning for this book. And, I had to decide early on how in depth I was going to go into it, just because I decided that I wanted the book to be more accessible to people who really didn't have a background in this. And I really think that one of the reasons that people don't know about Millie more is because material science is maybe not as sexy a science as astronomy and nuclear science, or, like particle physics, which, for whatever reason, I feel like maybe there's just some, psychological questions about our origins that, are touched by, what makes the smallest particles and where did we come from, and all of these things that maybe material science doesn't hit as much, or hasn't anyway. And so, but I did want to get to the basic, the bread and butter of her work. So, Millie was known as her nickname is the Queen of Carbon Science. So she did focus in her career on carbon materials. So carbon comes in many different forms. If you have a lead pencil, that's got the lead of the pencil is not the element lead. It's lead that's made out of graphite and a few other little materials, but it's mostly graphite. And then something like a diamond is also carbon, but that's not really what she studied. She ended up studying more of the graphite of the world. And so if you put the pencil on the paper, flakes of it will come off very easily. And but the actual bonds of the graphite layers, one layer of graphite is called graphene. The bonds between the atoms on the individual layers are extremely strong. And she kind of bounced around a little bit in terms of what she was going to like focus her career on at the beginning of her career. But once she stumbled on carbon, she and her husband, Gene, had really decided that and realized that there was some very interesting physics hiding in there. It was a system that was not super interesting to people at the time. Many solid state physicists were focusing on semiconductors. So semiconductors are materials that can conduct electricity better or worse if you change the environment a little bit. So they're actually, so if you add heat, for example, or light, they might, be better conductors. And so they're useful we know about them largely through computing machines. And when they started their careers in the 1960s, the development of computing machines was huge. And so Millie started looking into semiconducting materials, but she wasn't especially interested in them. She studied a couple and felt they were kind of the same and they had the same physics. Whereas the carbon that Gene had suggested she look at was a lot more technically difficult to understand. And it just seemed to be, there was a question of, it sort of acted like a metal, but it wasn't a metal. It's actually a semi-metal, which is sort of in between a metal and an insulator in terms of how much it can conduct electricity. And so she really began to be interested in the properties of how carbon forms like graphene conduct electricity, conduct heat, what happens to them if you put them in a huge magnet, just very basic science. And by that, I mean very fundamental questions about what happens to these materials in different environments. And, again, at the time when she first started, people thought that nothing interesting was going to come of her work. She also picked that subject because when she was raising her 4 little babies, she wouldn't have to worry so much about competition because everybody else was working on semiconductors, as I said. So this was actually a really fruitful field for her. And, she came in sort of on the ground floor. And because of that, she ended up, having an outsized role in the development of nanoscience related to carbons and other semi-metals and other materials. Her work helped establish the discovery of buckyballs, which are these spheres of carbon atoms that looks kind of like a soccer ball. And later, the discovery of very elongated buckyballs, which are now known as carbon nanotubes. It was really one of the really interesting things when I was doing the research for this book is, carbon nanotubes are relatively new. I mean, she and others, but, she was one of the premier people who were really thinking about this. They didn't really know what to call carbon nanotubes. So when I was looking through the papers that she had, worked on, they had like 15 different names for carbon nanotubes. And now everybody calls them carbon nanotubes, but it's just, it's kind of like a fun history of science thing where it's like, well, what are we going to call these things? I think she called them Bucky tubes for a while and, but anyway, carbon nanotubes, and then back to graphene later in her career. When she was working on graphite in her early days, it was kind of impossible to split up the layers. She started trying to do this by mixing other elements and seeing what would happen to the layers, but she couldn't really pry apart one individual layer and see just one atom thick. But then later in it was like the early 2000s, some scientists were able to do that and to, prove definitively that they had done it. And that actually ended up winning a Nobel Prize. And, she didn't win the prize, but she was definitely influential in that particular Nobel Prize to the point where she was actually invited by one of the Nobel winners to attend the ceremony and all of this. But she worked on, the development of graphene. And she said at one point that, later in her career, when graphene became like a hot subject, many scientists and engineers were redoing her experiments that she had tried to do and started working on back in the 60s and 70s. When the materials were very different that were open to her to be working on. But just in terms of what are some of the uses of graphene and carbon nanotubes, So buckyballs have not ended up being used that much. They were sort of highly hyped, but they've had relatively few applications. Carbon nanotubes have definitely had many applications, anything from plastic additives to make materials stronger. There are carbon nanotubes in microchip memory. There are carbon nanotubes sensors to try to sense different things in your body, whether it's DNA or other substances. You might have there's sporting equipment that's bolstered by carbon nanotubes, or certainly carbon fibers, which are not exactly the same, but they're another area that Millie studied highly and actually wrote a book about. Carbon fibers tend to be a little bit bigger. Actually quite a bit bigger usually, but they share some of the same physics. So many airplanes, many spacecraft have parts that have composites that have carbon nanotubes or carbon fibers in them, making them stronger, lighter, and ultimately more energy efficient. Graphene is just a substance that has completely taken off since the beginning of the discovery of its isolation in 2004 and 2005. There are just so many applications, and some of them are the same or similar as nanotube work, but also, there are some that are still being worked on. So people like to ask me, like, what's a very futuristic, application? And I always give the example of quantum computers. Quantum computers are, definitely something that physicists are working on to try to speed up computation and make, you can have just an order of magnitude more computations per time than with current technologies. And the fact that graphene is one substance that people are looking at to help enable this. So it's, hasn't been fully realized yet, but it's definitely being worked on. And then just today, you already probably have graphene in, there are actually flexible electronics. So certain cell phones can actually close. So graphene helps enable that. What are some other examples? I mean, there's just so many, it's kind of like all around us. And so, yeah, I could go on forever, so I'll stop there, but.
Yeah, because I before we open up for questions, I think we should open up for questions. So please, folks, get your questions ready. I want to show a couple more photos, especially there's one in particular that didn't make it into the book. And if you want to just maybe talk over while I put these photos up, of maybe some big surprises or anything else about Millie that you want to share before we open up for questions.
Okay, yeah, happy to. Yeah, so this is, one of my favorite pictures. I was mentioning to Kelly that unfortunately the photographer passed away shortly before, or right around the time when we were doing the permissions for our book. But this is just a picture of Millie at MIT. I believe it was in the 80s. She was someone who really, she became beloved in not only at MIT, but just in her field in general. Something that I learned in writing the book was just how much public service she did in the science community and in the engineering community. She, was president of American Physical Society, American Association of Scientists, those AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science.
The Advancement of Science, yeah.
the other AAAS. And in all of these roles, and she had many of them, she just was super inspiring, but she also was someone who really got down to work and tried to figure out what were some of the problems and, how could we fix them? How could we address them in a way that, was her attitude was to try not to create more resentment, but she really wanted to affect change. And she had a way of being, straight to the point, but also polite, so that people would say oh, right, we really should encourage more women to do this, or, we really should, for example, encourage young people to have roles at a higher level earlier on, so that later, we will establish, whether it's a national lab making sure that young people are included earlier on so that, just as things go along, if there's like a change in administration or people retire, that you'll develop young talent.
Yeah.
So
I love this picture. I never met Millie, but to me this just really captures, she's about to tell me something that's going to be amazing. She also has that like comfort, maternal figure already in there, and then with the science and the drawings in the background, I find this picture really captures so much of the spirit of your book. And also, just for the Hunter crowd, could you tell us a little bit about this picture?
Sure. This picture was taken in 1991. I believe it's at MIT, but I'm not 100% sure about that. It is, as far as I know, the only picture that exists of both Millie and Rosalind Yalow. So this is, decades after they had connected at Hunter. And, Millie remained close with Rosalind throughout her life, or throughout Rosalind's life. And, really shared a mentorship that was kind of one of those, like, I don't want to say perfect, but one of those mentorships that kind of crossed boundaries. She was sort of like a mother figure in a way to Millie. And, Rosalind had a personality that was very headstrong, and Millie's was a little different. She was a little bit more, she knew what she wanted, but she was also very accommodating. And so Millie, used to say that, like, in getting to know Rosalind, she got to know a side of Rosalind that other people didn't see. And so when I see this picture, I kind of see that, because it's like they're kind of old friends, and they know all the inside stories.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure they could tell some pretty horrifying and inspirational stories.
Yes.
Before I pass it over to Mac, I just have to shout out hi to Virginia and Vita, if you're still here. It's really nice to see you. I miss y'all. And I'll pass it over to Mac for questions. Thanks so much, Maya.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Hello, this has been terrific. We've got a few questions in the Q&A that I'll share with you now. The first one from Alexa. Alexa mentions that he or she went to nano meetups in the 90s and never heard Mildred's name. How does she intersect with Richard Feynman and others? And Alexa then thanks you for the book and for highlighting Mildred's career.
I missed the year that the person who's asking the question was there, but so she actually did connect with Richard Feynman. I don't know whether she was at that talk where Richard talked about he basically sort of posited the idea of nanoscience. He talked about there being room at the bottom for, basically building molecules and building entities and building things starting with atoms, which at the time was, it wasn't his idea. In fact, I remember doing research about this, that, somebody had sort of floated the idea and he kind of pointed it out at a conference, and that became sort of the starting point for this idea of, nano things taking over. And so she did say that she, I think she was at Cornell at the time, because he was at Cornell at the time when she was a postdoc. She took a class, I believe, or heard a lecture or took a class of his. And, she said that, I think she said that she took a quantum mechanics class, and this just didn't get into the book because there's so many stories that I couldn't include, but I believe she said she took a quantum mechanics course of his because even though she had taken quantum mechanics earlier, she was like, if you take one with Richard Feynman, it would be like nothing else. And so that was her feeling. I don't know too much more about their overlap. He ended up going to Caltech, and so I don't know if they corresponded or anything. I don't know if they had any kind of actual relationship, but I do know that she, at the very least, took some kind of course with him.
That's great. We have a comment for you to respond to from Hunter College Distinguished Professor of Psychology, Virginia Valian. And I just want to point out that Virginia authored an excellent chapter on the women who, from Hunter, who made great strides in scientific fields that appears in the Hunter College book, Hunter 150, Celebrating the Past, Caring for the Future. So Virginia's comment is, Millie took great joy in all the parts of her life. Unlike many women of her time, she had no bitterness. She was joyful.
Yeah, I would say that is something that I don't want to say set her apart, but it was something that she used to her great benefit to be able to sort of, and some would say that she might have had blinders on about certain things in terms of treatment of women, in the sciences. But in other ways, I think she really, tried to affect change quietly and behind the scenes. So I think just she did manage to get a lot done in that realm. But yeah, I mean, people have different ways of approaching different problems, and the fact is she just didn't let things bother her. She kind of always felt that there was more science to work on. So I think that was the gist of her personality. Yeah.
Virginia added a little something that I'll read also. She says, I don't think many people could adopt the attitude that Millie did or live a life as rich as Millie did. She and her children played music together and traveled together. She thought she could do anything.
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. Although, I mean, I think, she is someone certainly to aspire to. She made time for her family, and I think that is really important to remember. Some scientists have a hard time with work-life balance, and I remember her assistant made a point of saying that her evening calendar was as important as her daytime calendar. And so, yeah, that is something to aspire to as a young scientist.
Jill Barron asks, what was Millie's husband like? Was he a scientist? Was he supportive of her?
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. He was a scientist. He was a physicist in this exact same field, and he actually was Millie's co-author on many, many papers. In fact, he was, I think, if not the #1 co-author, then a high number. And he is someone who I really get into a little bit in the book in a way that, there's very little written about him. But yes, he was a theoretical physicist in condensed matter physics. He was extremely supportive of her. He was known to sort of get on people's bad side if they would treat Millie badly in any way. So he was basically, constantly protecting her and supporting her, both at work and, in their personal lives. He was the one who would sort of organize their, music nights, and he would sort of act as the conductor, even though he didn't actually play music, but everybody else in the family did. He was sort of a jokester. And yeah, I don't know how much more I could say, but he definitely was someone who was a huge influence on her career. And, was really important too, to many of her students and her colleagues that they worked together with in their group at MIT.
An unnamed questioner says, it seems that Millie benefited greatly from Rosalind Yallow's mentorship. Was she in turn a mentor to any other notable scientists?
Absolutely, yes. And I do get into the book a little bit. Millie had something like 60 grad students who earned PhDs under her, tutelage. And, some of them went on to become super famous in their fields, others less so, but, always has very successful careers in some way or another. One of the most famous and one of the earliest, Millie taught Shirley Ann Jackson, who is currently the president of RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. But she actually had a very similar trajectory, meaning Shirley Ann Jackson, that Millie did, in the sense that, she was a physicist, and then she ended up being in academia, but she also did a lot with government. And then, President Jackson ended up becoming president of RPI, and Millie ended up never wanting to actually go to the level of administration at MIT that would require her to stop doing research. But besides that, they had very overlapping, sort of career trajectories. Another person that one of her first female grad student, her name was Deborah Chung, and she's actually, I believe, at the University of Buffalo, and she herself is a very successful nanoscience and nanotechnology professor. She actually invented something called smart concrete, which is basically a way for concrete to have sensing properties using, I think it's nanofibers. And, Professor Chung was one of the people who worked on one of Millie's favorite, or just one of her experiments that she sort of talked about many, many times as being proud of. And I mean, I could go on. There's so many. She definitely had many grad students and people who were postdocs and undergrads too. And I mentioned a bunch of them in the book, but certainly couldn't mention all of them. As I said, she was beloved by, basically everyone. And she really helped launch the careers. I mean, I actually met someone on Twitter recently. Her name is Netia McCrae, who is an MIT student who's now an entrepreneur. And, Millie helped. And I didn't know this when I was writing the book, so it's not in the book, but I just found out about it through interaction on Twitter with this woman. And, she was just like, oh, I can't, she told me a little bit about the story of how Millie supported her work. I think it was in Brazil to start this project that was supporting underrepresented people in the STEM fields there. So through one way or another, she really did support so many people who came after her.
That's great. If it's okay with you, we can do a couple more and then wrap up.
Sure. Yeah,
This is
thanks.
an interesting one from another unnamed questioner. Do we have a sense of her personal views on the importance of technological innovation for building a better future?
I get the sense that obviously it depends on what technical innovation you're talking about. But, for instance, I know that she was very interested in energy technologies that would make a better world in terms of less reliance on fossil fuels and just making things more energy efficient. She actually helped to restart the field of thermodynamics in, I think it was the 1990s, because she was interested in this. So, she usually was someone who was more focused on the basic research. So again, if you don't know what that means, it's basically, the fundamental research that helps enable technological advances. She did have 5 patents related to thermodynamics, but for the most part, she was really interested in, how things worked at the base level, and then others would take those ideas and develop them into actual technologies. So I think at the end of the day, absolutely, she was interested in them. But, she was a physicist at heart, even though her home was in the electrical engineering department at MIT. She also later became, got an appointment in physics, but she really started out in electrical engineering as a way to teach, up and coming computer scientists and folks making new devices, the basic physics that was required to understand how those things would work.
Here's a technical question that is way over my head, but let's give it a shot. From someone named Gopal Tadapelli. This person asks or says, every carbon has 6 electrons. 2 of them are inner and 4 are valence electrons that make all external bonds. Any insights from Mildred on the 2 inner electrons?
Honestly, I'm gonna defer on this one. I did not go quite into that level of detail. Millie knew carbon atoms in and out, so I'm guessing that absolutely she knew what you were talking about, but unfortunately, I don't have that much insight into her, like how those 2 particular electrons would have changed anything. So unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to give you too much of an interesting answer, but I would guess that Millie knew it inside and out. She wrote actually 8 books on this area, so I think she was pretty well versed in these kinds of things.
Fair enough. So here's a final question. Did any of her children or grandchildren follow her footsteps into the STEM field?
Yes, they absolutely did. So she has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. I believe, let's see, let's think about her kids. So her daughter was a nuclear scientist, I believe, and I don't think she is in the field at the present, or maybe she did. I think at the time it was also mechanical engineering. One of her sons became a physicist as well in a very similar area to what she and Jean had worked on. I think one of her sons also became a computer scientist. So definitely a lot of interest in science. And one of her sons, Paul, told me that, he never envisioned himself being a scientist, but, Millie and Jean would bring their work home constantly and talk about it. And you know, at a certain point when you have the vocabulary kind of like bandied about it at home, you do pick it up a little bit. And then she has 5 grandchildren, and I want to say 3 of them are in the STEM fields. I'm not 100% sure about her one grandson, but 3 of her daughters are in STEM. One is in mathematics and psychology, I want to say. I think she has changed her major a couple of times, so I can't remember the final where she landed. One is also in physics, very similar to her area. She actually ended up going to MIT for grad school and overlapped with Millie for some time when she was there. So that's cool. And then another one is also in science, and I can't remember exactly which one she's in, but yes, so it has definitely rubbed off onto the next generation for sure.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we're just about finished. So thank you very much, Maya, for joining us for this discussion. And thank you, Kelly, for moderating. Very appreciated. And thank you to everyone who joined and for your excellent questions. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I wanted to thank everybody. Obviously, you know, I know Millie has a very special history with the Hunter community. And, you know, it was a joy I actually was able to go see the Hunter College High School when I was doing some research. I used to live very close to Hunter College. So, you know, it's nice to be able to kind of, after that research, like 4 years ago, you know, connect with folks who might have a connection there. Kelly, thank you so much for helping organize this event and putting together the images and stuff. And Mac, also, thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share Millie's story.
My
Yes,
pleasure.
thank you. Thank you for putting so much work into such a great book.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good night.